This is the Orkes podcast. Orkes is a managed version of Netflix Conductor, the most mature and popular orchestration product in the industry. Founded by the founding engineers of Netflix Conductor, Orkes helps businesses automate workflows and orchestrate microservices at scale. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Orkes podcast. And today on the podcast, we have Ju with us. Ju is a co-founder and CEO at Orkes. And before this, Ju was at Netflix. He was an architect there and spent a lot of years to actually co-found Conductor at Netflix. Before Netflix, Joe has also been a serial entrepreneur who's founded Pink Villa, very renowned site globally. And with this, I'm very happy to have Ju on the podcast. Ju has insane amount of work experience and has worked tons in the industry, and something which I can only aspire to be. So I'm very happy, Ju. Welcome to the podcast, and thanks for taking out the time.
Hey, thanks, Charis. Thanks for having me here. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for taking out the time, Ju. Today we wanted to discuss the hiring and the culture at Orcus, and I'm glad you took out the time. So we'll start with like just starting with how you founded Orcus and how that came into being, and then we'll see where are we headed with this.
All right. So, quickly about, if you look at like Orcus, right? Orcus is built on the top of Netflix Conductor. It's the most widely used and most popular orchestration engine that you can find in the market today, right? And if you look at the co-founders, we had actually co-invented Conductor while we were at Netflix, right? And it became hugely popular within the company, Netflix itself, right? And it started with one team, to start to spread within the organization, within multiple teams at Netflix. And we kind of open sourced the project back in I think late 2016, if I remember correctly. And over the last few years, we've seen a very similar adoption of this in the industry as well, right? You can see really popular companies companies like Tesla, for example, running their whole business on Conductor, right? And or companies like Swiggy, again running every single customer order that happens on Swiggy. India's largest food delivery company, running everything on top of Conductor, right? And then, this is a few things, examples in the retail market, and we saw kind of a sense of product market fit in open source, where we started to see companies in healthcare, for example, GE, or there are companies in fintech or other general areas like app modernization, and there were over, I think, 1,500, close to 1,500 folks of Conductor, probably more than that many companies already using it in the market. 200-300 of them are really large companies, right? And seeing that product market fit in open source, and also looking at all the companies that we were working with and talking to all the engineers out there, and seeing that there is a real need in this space to go and address, and that's basically what convinced us all to go and start a company around this, right? So it's been close to 6 months now, and here we had fabulous journey. We have a presence in all the big clouds, and customers using us in production, and especially in the midst of their core businesses, right? And that's something that's super exciting to us founders, and also all the great people who are building this product out.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I can completely agree. That's true. We've been speaking to people from, almost every continent. And you're right, like the penetration and the adoption has been insane for sure. And I want to like jump back to your story and how you came to be, and right. And this will also give us a little bit of insight into, what Orcus is about. So considering like, you've been a serial entrepreneur and you also worked at Netflix and, founded Conductor there. So out of these, you being a serial entrepreneur and also working for bigger companies, what have you preferred personally, and why?
Yeah, I think personal preference, I think if you look at all of the four founders, right? All of us had this entrepreneurial spirit and passion behind, everyone wanted to start something of their own at some point in time, right? And together we've been talking about different ideas for a while, right? But I think going back to your question, specifically what do you prefer and why, right? I think there's a great sense of things that you can achieve and learn when you're working at larger companies, right? Also working at startups, But I think like, running your own company and, working towards a goal and, working towards, what you really like to do, right? And that's something that you probably won't get when you're working in any other company, right? Like, hands down, I would prefer kind of, running your own company any point in time, right? And
Nice.
I think that's why we, all of us, working at like some of the best companies in the valley, coming down together, leaving, really lucrative jobs, and starting this, like, there's nothing like running your own company.
For sure. No, I would expect that. Makes sense. For sure. Yeah, I mean, completely agree with that point. I think both of these come with their own merits, and you're right. I think the thrill is completely different. So clearly, one of the things which seems to be like one of the harder problems while working at a startup is hiring and retaining talent, right? Because the bigger brands kind of take care of that just because of their popularity and like brand awareness. But like at startups, become like hiring and retaining talent becomes a little difficult, especially when you're founding something completely new. So, what are your thoughts on that? How do you personally retain and manage talent here?
Yeah, so if you look at like a company like ours at Orkes, like we are a managed services SaaS company, right?
Mhm.
And if you look at our overarching vision, right, like if you look at like really at the bottom of the stack, what we have is any company that's actually operating in the cloud today, right? Like cloud infrastructure, right? Something like AWS kind of started off back in 2006, right? And back in the day, I think Netflix was really the very first company that kind of completely started to operate in the cloud. Probably the very first company of that size to completely operate in the cloud, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of pioneered this whole thing, what we call cloud today, right? Like, and
Mhm.
today, any company that's starting off, right, like they don't even think about spinning off their own data centers. They start with the cloud, right, from day one, right? And it helps with a lot of things, right? Like your go to market improves a lot. Like you're
Mhm.
not spending insane amounts of capital just to get started, right? Like, and spinning off new applications, new services makes it like so much more easier, right? So the focus is trying to build stuff that's important for their end customer and business, right? So I think
Mhm.
like AWS kind of solved that early on, like, and now we have like these 3 4 really big cloud providers kind of really solve that problem, like AWS, Azure, GCP, and a bunch of other companies in that space,
Mhm.
right? So that's kind of the bottom of the layer of any tech stack that you take, your cloud infrastructure layer, right? And on the top of the stack is what companies give like real value for their end customers, right? So if you are a consumer business, right, you're thinking about your mobile apps, your websites, maybe it's a API layer that you're giving, right? Or maybe it's a business facing site. So whatever business solutions you're giving, right, that's at the bottom of the stack, giving direct value to the customer, right?
Mhm.
Now, in between all this is where companies spend 40%, 45, 50% of their time, resources, money, people in building what we call platform teams, right? And
Mhm.
you just go into any big company today, right? Like half, more than half sometimes is just spent on doing this, right? And that's not the core of those companies businesses, right? But
Mhm.
if you think about it, if you don't do something, you're never going to be able to build a really magical service, right?
Yeah.
And that's why like companies spend so much amount of time doing that. But one thing to notice there is that every company does the same thing, right? Like the
Mhm.
platform teams, like pick any company, big, large, small, they're probably doing like slightly different variants of this, right? Like think about your you're doing your stuff around data. There's like data platform teams. There's stuff around like applications, application management, spinning services, cataloging. Like these are common things that companies do. And any team that's building platform teams are kind of rinsing and repeating this all over again. And that's
Mhm.
where our kind of overarching vision is, to go and kind of help companies easily solve that problem. And one key aspect to that, one key building block of that is orchestration, right? And
Mhm.
that's what we're really starting off with, right? And Netflix Conductor is so kind of something that we built while we were at Netflix, right? So we know kind of the impact that's had on Netflix and also in the industry after we have open sourced it.
Mhm.
So that's what you're really going after, right? Like now, back to your question on why I brought this up is, if you look at it, the things that we're going after, there are some of the kind of you know important features of what we need to be really good at as a company. Is one
Yeah.
is technology, obviously technology, right? The
Mhm.
second piece of that is um, general marketing, right? Like you have a great product out there. People have discovered it through the open source thing, like because like companies like Netflix and Tesla and the Swiggies and JP Morgans of the world have been kind of using this at large scale. Like this is so many great company examples of great companies who are already using Conductor, right? Now, marketing this is also very important, like taking this to kind of every developer on the planet. So marketing becomes a very, very important tool here, right? So that's the second piece of thing that we want to focus on, from the hiring perspective. And marketing comes in kind of a lot of different flavors, right? Like one is, think of this as developer marketing, right? That's where developer relations come in, right? Building communities around this and stuff like that. And there's general marketing saying, hey, marketing to people who are even non-developers, right? Like people, not every company is like tech first, right? So but that problem exists everywhere. Like at some point in time, every company has some kind of tech involvement, right? And orchestration is a very clear part of that. So marketing not only to the developer community, but also in general to the business community. So marketing becomes a very, very important piece of this stuff as well, right? So that's, I would say, like kind of the this second pillar that we should be focusing on, right? So from the tech point of view, if you look at, like, I think your question was more around like hiring, how do we think about this, right? So tech point of view, like people working on the core engineering products, and there what we really want to optimize on is time zone, right? And when we started off, obviously we are in the US, right? Based off in the West Coast, right? Like, and so we want to optimize there on time zone, right? So when you look at hiring, like we are trying to optimize on this specific time zone, right? Like 2-3 hours plus or minus, right? So that way, on a day-to-day basis, like the tech team gets to talk to each other, whether it's online, offline. And so that's a big element of what we're trying to optimize for. So obviously talent is definitely there in the mix, but hiring people in a common time zone is a really, really key factor, right? The other pieces of it, like for example marketing, right? Like so marketing, like you're building great technology for people to use it, like, but the people who are using it are all over the world, right? And which basically means that developer relations, marketing. And also the third pillar is like, as people start to use this, like, customer success, customer onboarding, right? Customer will become a very, very important plug into this, right? Which means that our solution architect, customer success engineers, right? Like these are people, the roles that we have here and the people that we are hiring for here should be, we'll have presence in like, kind of all countries, all regions around the world, right? So that we're trying to help. We don't really focus on kind of optimize on time zones. We try to kind of distribute it across the world, because and you, as you called out earlier, right? Like we have customers all over the globe, right? Which means that these kind of roles, it's also important to have it all across the globe, right? So hopefully that gives a good perspective on how we are trying to hire and where we are trying to hire.
So thanks for answering that, Drew. And my next question just revolves around something that I'm particularly interested about. I've noticed and I've read that every interview has their personal favorite interview questions, right? Like even Elon Musk has this personal favorite question. I think his favorite question is that you're standing on the surface of the earth, you walk a mile down south, a mile on the west, a mile north, and you end up exactly where you started. Now, a couple of questions on that question itself. One, what's the solution? Because I couldn't figure out myself. And the second, how does this question exactly help you to understand the candidate a little better? If you could just talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I think I've kind of heard like different variants of that question back in the past, right? But I think like this question specifically, when you look at it, I guess this is kind of when you think about the question intuitively, right? Like when you think about the earth, like in general in our day-to-day lives, we think about like the earth, kind of our surface that we walk on just being flat, right?
Yes.
And when you think about that, like walking 10 miles south, east, and further up north, right? Like and you generally won't end up in the same place, right? You think about like, hey, three sides of a square, and then you should be like 10 miles away from where you started off, right? Like
Yes.
but then when you think about it more, right, like there are some points on the earth where you can end up at the same place. And I think like probably some things to look out for in this kind of question is like these are kind of non-standard things that happen in life, right? And you will see that in part of the problems that you solve, right? So thinking kind of beyond the box, thinking outside of the box is probably what you can probably get. What kind of things that candidates go out to kind of saying, hey, this sounds impossible. Like, should I just give up, right? Like, or let me see what kind of potential solution I can find. Like, think about in ways that a normal candidate wouldn't think, right? Those could be kind of ideas to kind of things to look out for from the candidate's perspective, right? So since you brought up this question, like, that's a really interesting one. And if you kind of a general good answer or one of the solutions for that is just begin at the North Pole, right? Like and the kind of the North Pole. Actually, let me kind of share my screen here. I know this is a version of this is going to be on podcast, but
Sure.
we'll probably also have like a kind of a YouTube version of this, so maybe it'll benefit some of those folks as well. Can you see my screen here?
I can see your screen, yes.
All right. So I kind of pulled up a rendering on Google Earth, right? So if you look at it, right, like this is kind of the North Pole right here, right? So, one of the most common solutions for this is, hey, start at the North Pole, kind of go down 10 miles south, go around any kind of latitude where you landed up, right? And go 10 miles east, and then, go back up north, and then, you'll reach the same point that you started off with, because this is a sphere, and then you started off at a point which is a unique point on the point of the Earth, right? That's the North Pole, right? And that kind of leads you to answer, right? So that's a different way of thinking about it, right? But then the other thing could be like, is that it, right? Like, could there be more other other solutions to this as well, right? Like, and there are a few interesting ones, right? So if you kind of go down south, right? Like, so all the way down to the South Pole, right? And there actually are infinite points on the surface of the Earth that will actually solve for that, right? So first thing to notice is that let's kind of find out. Here's a bunch of latitudes that we have, right? Like you will find latitudes on the surface of the Earth, probably very close to the South Pole, which are let's say 10 miles in circumference, right? So let's look at there's a kind of a latitude calculator that I pulled up, right? So 90 miles, 90 degrees, south or north, the distance is like 0 miles, obviously. Like, if you go down 80, that's 12 miles, like, 81 is, okay, 81 is like 10 miles, right? So what happens here is that, 81 miles is probably going to be somewhere around here, right? So if you start 10 miles north of this, right? And that could be a point somewhere here. Come down south, right? And then you go 10 miles east, right? And just naturally, this being exactly 10 miles in circumference, you'll go down and then come back to the same point, right? And then you go back up, and then you're at the same point, right? So
I see.
that's one set of solutions. So basically, you can start at any point on a latitude that's 10 miles north of the latitude that's 10 miles in circumference, and then you'll get an infinite number of points that can solve your solution, right? So that's like another way to think about it, right? Now, if you take that down further, right? So that's like one kind of thing in circumference that gives you 10 miles, right? So similarly, right? Find a latitude that's 5 miles in circumference, like probably, let's say, 85 degrees south or something, right? Now go 10 miles up north, right? And go down south again, and and then reach the latitude, let's say 85 degrees. That's 5 miles in circumference. And then rotate around that twice, right? So now you're again back at the same point, right? So it's you actually went 10 miles each, but you did the whole thing twice. So you went 5 miles in one circle and then came back another 5 miles. So now you travel 10 miles east and landed up at the same point and go back up, right?
I see.
So now you found two set of solutions, right? One was 10 miles find a latitude that's 10 miles in circumference, and you find something that's 5 miles. Then you keep on find something that's 10 over 3 miles, and then you rotate that 3 times, and then you can find infinite number of such points. Exactly, right? So so that's like, the first one that we saw is like one set of solutions. The second one is like, that does the North Pole, right? One solution basically, right? Now you have a new pattern of solutions, infinite number of them, new sets of solutions, right? Maybe one other thing that you can also think about is like, same thing that you went to the North Pole, like, um, the same concept right there, right? This is something that, maybe the audience can do some math and just try to figure out themselves, right? Where,
Mm-hmm.
let's say 81.5 was kind of the latitude. Can you start at a point maybe just south of the North Pole? Like, and if the distance between that and this is 10 miles, like maybe you
Mm-hmm.
can do the same set of solutions here. But just looking at this, like, it doesn't look like, this is more than 10 miles, like 81.5 is probably not more than 10 miles from this, like just looking at the circumference. So probably there isn't a solution, but, interesting exercise for the audience to go check this out.
That's very cool. So basically, the idea is whenever you're walking in one direction, you're theoretically going along the circumference,
Yep,
right? And that way you
exactly.
can have multiple. Oh, that's very cool. Perfect. I
Yeah, but
thought
I think
so.
like the question itself, if you think about it, right, like it's trying to look into, how much can you think outside of the box, right? Like,
Yeah.
first thing, it looks like impossible, right? And then
Mhm.
you found, hey, there's one point, right? Then the question is like, do you stop at that, or do you go and look at like, a great deal of good solutions out there and try to pick the best, right? Like, I
Mhm.
think those are kind of qualities that you can kind of get from these kind of questions, right? Not just how to solve the problem in general, but, just the kind of uh, uh, the
Approach. Yeah.
attitude of the approach and the attitude of just going and, just not stopping at one thing and just trying to find the kind of the best out there, right? Like, and
Hmm.
that's something that you can look out for from questions like this, right?
I see. So, I mean, Elon's basically looking for relentless problem solvers. I mean, not just one solution, but however many as you can get, really.
Yeah, and I think like, see, those kind of things are super important because, like, if you are looking at a company like Orcus, where we are trying to solve a problem, and the space that we are in is as big as the cloud itself, maybe actually
Hmm.
even bigger, which means that trying to be the best in the industry is actually
Hmm.
being very, very important. Also trying to capture the a good portion of the market is also very important, right? With
Right.
that means, like, hiring the right kind of people becomes super important, right? Like hiring the best in the industry is also very important, right? So, and interviewing is a very, very tough process, right? Like, and you only get like, maybe two three different people who can talk to them, especially at a company at an early stage like ours, right? And we want to hire the best out there. So I think like, the kind of questions that you ask,
Hmm.
from a technology standpoint, from a problem solving standpoint, from a passion standpoint, right? And also from a general culture fit, right? Like, yes, maybe all of these check marks are there, but does that person fit the culture at what we are looking here at Orcus, right? Like, so those are kind of super important thing, right? And especially early on, the culture that we want to form in the company is the culture that our early hires bring into the company as well, right?
Yeah.
So that's like super important as well.
True. Wasn't there was like a math, right? Like the square root of the company's total employees do 50% of the work. And those are usually hired like in their early stages. Would you say something like that exists? So let's say there are like 100 people, like the 10 people are responsible for setting up like 50% of the culture or 50% of the entire, how the company looks like. Is
Yeah,
that
I think like, you can. So in an early startup, this is probably hard to find, but as a company grows bigger and bigger, like you will find that probably to be true in a lot of bigger companies, right?
something?
You don't want to have that in a smaller startup like ours, right? Like,
Yes.
here we want to have like, all great people in the company. I think sometimes as the company grows bigger, and I've seen this when working in other companies, like,
Mhm.
where as a company grows big, and I think like, 10,000, I think that's a kind of a figure where you see that the culture kind of breaks apart, like if you don't
Yeah.
make a really, really good attempt to kind of keep it together, right?
Mhm.
So it's again super important, like, as the company grows, to keep that that aspect of hiring, like, looking into culture fit is very, very important, right?
For sure. Yeah, I can agree. And so I mean, like for anybody who's listening, right? So they're probably listening to it from a eye of how can I crack an interview possibly at Orcus, right? So what are some interview tips you'd probably give them? And when I say interview tips, could be both technical as well as cultural.
Yeah. So I think like one of the other things that so if you look at like, early, when we started off, like, all of the founders were heavily involved in all of the interviews, right? Both technical, sense of, working and being going to be successful at a startup, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
culture fit, right? Like, and we quickly, and I think that was one of the main things that we focused on, like especially the first month or two, right? And we were able to hire at such a rapid pace, right?
Yes.
And then, since then we've also had like some, great folks in the company also join us in the interview process, for example, right? So technical interviewing questions, for example, right? Like, a lot of our early hires have been, core engineering, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so getting the rest of the team involved, because these are people they're going to be working with as well, right? So it's also very important that our company's employees are also involved in the interview process as well, right? Like, but like one of the other things when I look at like culture fit and stuff like that, generally I look at, hey, just questions like, looking into problems that they have solved in the past before, something that they are super proud of, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and then, asking those candidates to kind of go into details of those projects, right? And you can go through kind of nitty gritty details. And if a candidate is talking about a role that they're or a piece of work that they're super proud of, a piece of project that they worked on was super proud of, right? And no
Mm-hmm.
matter how much back in the past, they're going to remember every single detail of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if and you can really weed out like, people who are kind of BSing their way through this, or they're actually really involved in that. And it also brings about, the way they talk during that project, right? How they're going to explain on what they did, like, it also brings about their passion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're working in an area for a long time, like, domain knowledge also builds up, right? Like, and they would have learned so much about their product, they are going to teach you stuff that you never know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of things to look out for, right? And I think if you look at like all the kind of great hires that we had in our company here at Orcus, and also in my past life in other companies as well, right? These kind of questions and people who've done really well in this kind of questions over time, I figure out like they tend out to be really great employees as well.
Yeah. So in-depth knowledge, domain knowledge. It's basically like a well-versed. How deeply were they immersed in their entire thing that they were doing? Fair
Yeah.
enough. Yeah. And I mean, while that may not be a tip, it's just basically, it's like, it is what it is. I mean, if you're into it, you're into it. You'll probably crack.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like outside of that, the core skills definitely come in, right? As an engineer, right? Live coding sessions, right? There's nothing better than that, right? Like a pick a problem, something that's generic enough, like, get them to, use their favorite IDE, their favorite programming language, and have a crack at it, right? Like, and,
Mhm.
and a problem that's, it doesn't have to be something specific, they don't really have to find a solution at the end of it, but, their general approach, how they think about this problem, like, how they go and, you're going to have problems in, while you're doing, coding that up, like, figuring out like, how they debug through that, like, you get a sense of how they're going to, work on some things like this on a day-to-day basis, right? Like,
Mm.
and then same thing like on the devrel side, it's probably, community building, or, how do they come up with documentation, or how do they blog about this stuff, like looking into the past work, for example, right? Like, I think like different areas have different things, like solution architecture, like, or your solution architects or your customer success engineers, right? Like, you need to not only be technically strong, right? You need to be able to grasp, in case of, Orcus, right? Putting yourself in the shoe of the consumer, right? How they're going to be using this, and then also communication is very, so very important, because and communication mostly in tech communication, because in the end of the day, like, your direct users are engineers and business people, right? Like, and so as a customer success engineer, right, talking to the folks directly on a day-to-day
Mm.
basis, right, helping them like solve their problems using Orcus, right? Like, every role has a different set of quality, right? Apart from the other general stuff, like there are specific questions that helps you find, like, what core skills they're looking for and how good they are at it.
Yeah, fair enough. Makes sense. True. Cool. I mean, this is great to know, and anybody who's listening, I'm sure this will help them. Um, my next question to you were like, what? So, out of all the roles that we've hired for, or we're potentially going to hire for, do you think having like a distributed team, like deters us from hiring a certain role or possibly makes it a little more challenging? And if it does, then which roles were hard to hire based on the setup that we're in? If not, well, then, how do you do it?
Yeah. So see, I think if you look at a time like 5 years back, right?
Mhm.
Getting entire distributed teams. I think there are companies who have successfully done that in the past before, but that was always a big challenge, right? Like getting
Mm.
a full set of distributed team. But some of the things is that comes as a big hindrance is time zones, right? Because if you are hiring people who core time zones are like 12 hours apart, right? Like you get a
Yeah.
very small bit of overlap during the day, right? So but there are some roles like developer relations, customer success engineers, like we need them to be closer to where our customers are, right?
Right.
And those are natural fit for having like completely distributed team. Like you don't have to really worry about time zones, because you have to worry about time zones, but not that the whole company or the let's say a whole devrel or needs to be at the same time zone, but be closer to the time zone of the consumer, right?
Mm.
Um, but core engineering, right? Like that's something that we focus on. Like, hey, generally, like in a good portion of that is like being in a specific time zone. Like and we kind of focus on generally the US time zone, right? Like and this
Mhm.
and plus or minus. I mean, US itself is like the most popular time zones are 4 hours apart. Like at 2 or 3 hours, like you get a decent bit of kind of regions that you can hire some great candidates out of.
Makes sense. And so there hasn't been any challenge, right, in hiring any kind of certain role. And clearly, time zones weren't necessarily like a deterrent factor.
So far, no, right? Like, and even even with the kind of core engineering roles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, before pre-pandemic, right? Getting kind of collaboration was like a kind of a really kind of hard to solve thing when people were catching kind of working remotely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Walking into somebody's room and there's just whiteboarding solutions and
Yes.
brainstorming with them, right? But I think like over the course of the last 2 years, people have learned how to do that really well. Like there's a lot of great tooling around that, and that was one of the things that I was concerned about, like when we started off with, like we just didn't have any choice because we were in the middle of the pandemic at that time, right?
Right.
But over time, like we've seen that we found some great tools and general way of working that's it's never been a hindrance so far. So
Nice. It's great. I think that's a testament of the team that we're building also. That's nice.
absolutely, yeah.
Perfect. All right. So my last question, right, regarding culture and hiring per se. I want to know what roles are we hiring for and how soon are we looking to fill them? And anybody who's looking, how can they apply?
Yeah, I think we will always be hiring, right? And I think if you look at it, I think it'll probably go around the kind of roles that we have will go around in cycles, right?
Mhm.
If you look at early on, our focus was mostly on core engineering, developer relations, right? Like that was a core focus. And as we built out these great products, right? And have presence in all the clouds, right? Like and consumers are kind of using us in production in all of these great clouds that we build products for, which naturally leads into hiring like great sales folks, right? And we've started with some of them already, right? So I think like moving forward, I think the given the cycle of the product we are in right now, I think sales is going to be super important.
Mhm.
And as with sales, also it's also important that we are selling this great product to customers in need, like they are using in the core of the businesses, right?
Mhm.
But we also want to make sure that those customers are successful using our product, right? Which means
Mhm.
that solution architects, customer success engineers, those kind of roles also become super important, right? And then
Mhm.
the cycle continues. Then you do that, like, and then there are next set of great products that we want to build, and then the
Yeah.
focus will be more on tech, and then that cycle will keep continuing, right?
Right.
But as I said, like we're always hiring. Like go to Orkes.io, right? We have a link for jobs and opportunities on that page, right? You can hire directly to that, and we have a integration with a bunch of popular sites, like you can reach out to us on LinkedIn, right? But all of our roles should be on our Orkes.io page.
Right. Yeah. I think anybody who's looking, like you said, If you find us anywhere on on LinkedIn, Twitter, websites, or wherever, just I'm sure it'll lead you to a place where opportunities are available. If not, you can just directly ping one of us and we'll help you with it. Thanks, Ju. This was super helpful. I personally learned a lot. So, I'm glad anybody who's listening probably will share the sentiment. For anybody who's listening, feel free to reach out to us. We have presence over GitHub, social media. We have our communities on Discord and Slack also. You can ping Ju or anybody in the founding team, Boney, Viren, Dilip, who are the co-founders of Arcus, and they'll help you get started with the product, or if you're looking to get hired as well. Thanks, Juvid. I want to thank you for taking out the time, and I'm glad you were here and could speak to us.
Hey, thanks, Sharish. Thanks for having me again.
Awesome, great. Thanks everybody for listening in. I'll see you again in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.
All right, see you. Bye.
To learn more about Orkes, check us out at orkes.io. Try our playground at play.orkes.io. You can ask all your questions and contribute to our Slack and Discord communities. Link available on our website.